So this morning, I wanted to talk a little bit about unity and the idea of prayer, the evolution of prayer. Those of you who have been around unity for a while might recall that when people ask what unity is all about, there are three things that are usually mentioned: prayer, publishing, and education. And the prayer aspect of it refers to something that co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore started all the way back in 1890. They started an organization called the Society of Silent Help. Now, if that name doesn't sound familiar to you, that's because the same organization is now known as simply Silent Unity, which has been operating continuously now for 129 years. Now, I know a lot of folks here have not had the opportunity to visit Unity Village, so I want to start this morning with a look at the evolution of the Silent Unity prayer ministry. Got a few slides up here just to show you what that looks like. Look at that. That's probably sometime back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where they mostly did correspondence and writing. People would send in letters and they would respond to them. So those are the Silent Unity letter writers banging away on those old-fashioned typewriters, answering the different letters. And then next year we have, well, of course, when the telephone came into widespread usage, they adopted the telephone, and it became the first telephone prayer ministry in the world. And you can see the operators there sitting at, and a lot of the architecture is still there at Unity Village, very 1930s Art Deco, or actually prior to the 30s, that kind of architecture came into popularity. And then next we have, oh yes, so every day, and this still goes on today, every day at 11 o'clock, there's a prayer service for Silent Unity workers, and this is a picture of one that's being led by Charles Fillmore in person back in the day. And let's see what else we have here. That is the current Silent Unity building. All the way up there at the top, that room up there is what they call the Prayer Vigil Chapel. If you ever call Silent Unity, at the end of the time that you have together with the prayer associate, they'll tell you that your name and your prayer requests are going to be held for 30 days in confidence and in prayer. And what they have is a continuous 24-hour, 24/7, all year long prayer vigil that goes on in that room up there, where there's a light that, they call it the light that always shines. So anywhere you're on the campus, you can look at that tower up there, and there's always a light on in there, and that means that Silent Unity is at work with their prayer vigil. And let's see if we have anything else. Is that the last one? Okay, that's the Silent Unity Chapel now that is used for the daily prayer service there. I think, okay, one more. That is the actual prayer vigil room, and they bring in the prayer requests, and they're usually stacked up over here on the table on printouts. So they are literally there. When they tell you that that's what they're doing, they deliver, and they're doing exactly that. So that's just a brief trip through Unity Village and Silent Unity. And as I said before, it is the oldest continuously operating prayer ministry in the world. As I said, 24/7, continues to grow. And I think the reason it continues to grow is because they were continuing in the tradition of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, which means that their ideas about prayer are both revolutionary and evolutionary, growing, building on what comes before. You know, back in the 1800s, and that's the era that the Fillmores come from, there were basically four ways of describing prayer. Four different types of prayer, if you will. These four up here. There were prayers of petition, intercession, praise, and thanksgiving. That was pretty much it. That's what the Fillmores had to work with. And we all know what these are because they're still around today. And if we come from a more traditional religious background, we've probably done all of these at different times in our lives. A prayer for petition. We all know what that is, right? A prayer for petition is when we want something. Give me this, give me that. It's like a wish list that we present to God. It can cover everything from healing to a new car to a new private jet. Prayers of intercession, on the other hand, are directed outward. It's another kind of wish list, but this time we want God to do something for someone else, to heal someone, to change something, change the weather, help one side win a war. We've heard that before. Or help one side or another in a sports situation, like basketball. Get Kevin Durant back in the game, you know what I'm saying? Someone else had a prayer for, was it UCLA baseball team? Okay, I guess they need help too. So, does God care about sports? Heck no, but you know, we still do it. Then there are the prayers of praise, and there's a couple of ways to look at this. Now, sometimes the prayer of praise comes across as a form of flattery. Flattery paints God as a bit of a narcissist. It's like we have to make God feel good by saying nice things about him or her, but it's most always him. Try to imagine, if you will, a codependent God or a codependent relationship with God. We want God to feel good. To put it kindly, it's a rather limited way of looking at things. Now, on the other hand, I think that a prayer of praise can be a spontaneous, heartfelt reaction to something that we find awesome or wonderful. A natural wonder, and it doesn't have to be a lot of flowery words. Each of us has our own special way of reacting to something wonderful. And many of us have special words or phrases in our vocabulary, many of which start with the word holy, followed by, shall we say, other more colorful words when we react to something beautiful and spontaneous. Did I get this next one? Oh yeah, so somebody put this up there. They're calling that ooh-ah point, right? So you look out over that magnificent canyon there and you ooh and you ah. See, it doesn't even have to be words. So that's a prayer of praise, I think. And praise is closely related to the next one, which is thanksgiving, or another way of saying it is gratitude, gratefulness. One of the great spiritual philosophers we talk about a lot in Unity was a guy who lived in the 13th century by the name of Meister Eckhart. You've probably heard this quote many times. One of my favorite quotes is about gratitude. He says, if the only prayer you ever say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice. Now, stuff like that and other things got him branded a heretic back in the day. I think they've recently come around and exonerated him, but there you go. So a prayer of gratitude is probably the most simple, affirmative, and complete form of prayer that there is, which brings us to a fifth kind of prayer that we don't have up there. This is the one that was developed in Unity, what I think is a revolutionary, evolutionary form of prayer, which we call affirmative prayer. Affirmative prayer in Unity. That's what our chaplains learn, and that's what you'll hear about. This is what our co-founder Charles Fillmore had to say about the subject. He says that understanding shows that prayer is more than asking God for help in this physical world. Actually, we have become a human race of praying beggars. Prayer is not supplication or begging. It is more than supplication. Supplication is impotent. Do not supplicate or beg God to give you what you need. Prayer is a simple asking for that which we know is waiting for us, and an affirmation of its existence. I like that one. A human race of praying beggars. Don't beat around the bush, Charles. And in the interest of being fair and balanced, here's something from Myrtle Fillmore, which is equally revolutionary and evolutionary. Myrtle says, prayers aren't sent out at all. Sometimes that is our trouble. Where would we send our prayers? We should direct them to our minds and hearts and affairs. We commune with God mind within our own consciousness. Prayer is an exercise to change our thought habits and our living habits, that we may set up a new and better activity in accord with the divine law rather than with the suggestions we've received from various sources. All right, so that's, call it old school unity, still perfectly relevant, but let's come forward a few years, over 100 years. Just a few years ago, Unity minister Linda Martella-Whitsitt wrote a book called How to Pray Without Talking to God, Moment to Moment, Choice by Choice. And according to the author, there is really only one reason we pray. She says that we pray to claim and assert our divine identity so that we can live more fully from it. We pray so we may embody divine nature. This type of prayer is called affirmative prayer. Okay, so divine identity, divine nature. That's some unity speak there, unity jargon, I guess. And maybe the best way to understand what that means, divine identity and divine nature, comes from the series we just finished using that book called Blueprint, where they show that humankind has a genetic predisposition to create a good and just society. That's what we want to get in touch with. That's what we want to claim, develop, and assert. I think that's just another wonderful way of saying our divine nature or our divine identity, that blueprint for goodness. So praying without talking to God means we need to stop treating God as an invisible superhuman out there someplace. It doesn't mean we can't talk. It's just a question of our intention and our direction. Where are we looking? Is it like we're talking to an imaginary friend? Or are we trying to clarify our thinking? You know, an internal conversation can be very useful in organizing our thoughts and working our own way to the point where we become aware of the divine nature or the blueprint so that we can better embody it and cultivate it. One of the things that got me involved in Unity in the first place was this enlightened approach to prayer. And there used to be a class that was offered at many Unity centers. It was called Life of Prayer. Those of you who have been around, some of you LUT students might remember Life of Prayer. It was divided into part 1 and part 2. And one of the things I remember from that course that really got my attention was when they said that prayer is for the purpose of changing one thing and one thing only: your own consciousness. That made a lot of sense to me, because otherwise prayer would be magical thinking. The Unity approach makes prayer a discernment process. You know, it's okay to want something to change, but first we have to create an open and inquiring state of mind so that we can find out if it is something that can change and if we can help that process along, if we can change it or help that process along. If not, then what we need to discern is a way to be okay with what is, even if we can't change it, even if there's no way that we can see that it might even change. And if that sounds like the Serenity Prayer, well, where do you think it came from? The major difference here is that nobody out there has to grant us anything. Nobody has to grant us the serenity or the wisdom, because again, it's affirmative prayer. And one of the things we're affirming is that the divine nature or the blueprint is a part of who we are, and we just have to get in touch with it. Something else that we say in Unity is that prayer is a consciousness conditioning tool, which is how Unity author Eric Butterworth describes it. He says that affirmative prayer is a form of asking, but it's not like we're giving a wish list to God, like a prayer for petition. Here's how Eric described it. He says, you ask for your good in the sense of claiming your inheritance. A good worker who comes in early, leaves late, who always tries to improve his performance and help the company, is asking for promotion. And it usually comes because He has created conditions that make that result inevitable. You ask for life by affirming life. You ask for success by getting in the consciousness of success. And it goes on from there. We can continue with the same line of thought. We pray for health by cultivating healthy habits, by affirming our own inherent wisdom and ability to discern healthy choices that will support the natural healing capacity of the body, which we also affirm. If we are facing illness or disease, then wouldn't it be more productive to affirm wisdom and strength instead of just asking for the condition to go away? You know, most of the time, we already know the answer or have a pretty good idea about how to find the answer to a particular question or a problem or a challenge that we have. Affirmative prayer is about creating in us the disposition and the awareness to find what we want. You know, we've heard that old saying, when the universe hands you lemons, make lemonade. Exactly. Well, what if I don't like lemonade? What do? Do I pray for the lemons to go away? Magical thinking, right? Or do I pray for the lemons to be magically transformed into cherries or whatever? More magical thinking, right? Better yet, when the universe hands us lemons, why don't we just say, no thanks, and then go out and get what we really want? That would seem to be the best solution to that whole thing. That's empowering. So, when we say that the purpose of prayer is to change our own consciousness, that is a practical application. And when we get it, we will show up differently in the world. And this isn't something that comes easily or naturally, especially if we've grown up being conditioned to think of God as the invisible superhuman out there who won't pay attention to us or hear us unless we're loud, repetitive, flashy, you know, like the child in the classroom trying to get the teacher's attention, you know, like over here, over here. If somewhere along the line people forgot the way Jesus regarded prayer, Jesus was a minimalist when it comes to prayer. Here's what he said on the subject. He said, whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners so that they may be seen by others. Whenever you pray, go into your room, shut the door, pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Somehow that gets lost in the shuffle. You know, it's one of the myths about prayer, is that it has to be loud, flashy, and long. It's a myth that needs to be busted. Another myth is that prayer is more effective if more people join in. People joining together in prayer for a common cause has nothing to do with effectiveness. Quantity does not equal quality. It's all about transforming consciousness, all right? The reason we may want to involve more people is because we are transforming consciousness. It doesn't make any result any more likely. You know, so often when there's a natural disaster in the world, we hear about prayers being requested and prayers sent. What's really happening in those situations is that people are choosing to consciously express caring and compassion. At the very least, they're expressing caring and compassion, which is always a good thing because the world needs more caring and compassionate people. When we say that we're sending our prayers, as in thoughts and prayers, what we're really saying is we see you, we hear you, we care about you. You're not alone, even if we can't be with you physically or take any direct action. So what it does is it invites us to take a moment out from our self-centered, distracted form of existence and become aware of others and become aware of how we react to whatever it is that's happened. And in practical terms, of course, that outpouring of care and compassion can and ought to turn into forms of physical support, money, donations, things like that. The most important thing about thoughts and prayers is that they don't become a substitute for action or responsibility. If something can be done, then do that also. Thoughts and prayers followed by consistent action wherever and whenever possible. I like to think of a call for prayer as an invitation for our human community to join in an awareness of the reality of suffering and to put our focus on the means that we've already